Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is Sophie from English Australia. Thanks for coming along. I just want to check that the webinar is working properly. So if you can hear me and see the image on the screen, can you please just type in yes? Great, I'm getting lots of yeses. Fantastic. All right, so welcome to the webinar, Blended Learning Design. Today's presenters are Kimberly Baskin and Benjamin Carkagis from the Centre for English Teaching at the University of Sydney. So Kimberly and Ben are both education managers at CET, and last year they were both part of a team that designed a new online component for the University Pathways program at CET. And they presented on this project at the English Australia conference. I went along to the presentation and thought it was great. And so hence how they've been invited to present today's webinar. So Kim and Ben, I'll hand over to you now.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Sophie. So hello, everyone. My name's Ben. Like Sophie said, I'm one of the education managers at the Centre for English Teaching. And Kimberly?
Hi, sorry. Hello everyone, I'm Kimberly or Kim, and I'm also an education manager, and I'll be speaking in the second half of the presentation.
So we're going to talk today about our experience as learning designers and how we help design and implement blended learning in programs at CET, primarily, as Sophie said, our DEC, our University Pathway program, but also in other courses as well. But before we begin, it would be nice to get an idea of who's here today and what their perspective on blended learning might be. So we might just throw open a quick poll, if that's okay, Sophie. So could you please let us know which category best fits your role? Okay, Sophie, are those the final results?
They are.
Okay, great. So it's a nice even mix, I think, between teachers and either managers or DOSers, which is great. I think regardless of which category you fall into, we will be covering basic concepts and showing practical examples that are relevant to both teachers and course designers and managers. I think it should come across in the presentation, but we really do believe that teachers are at the heart of blended learning design and really have to be strong advocates for blended learning. We might mention designing the course quite a lot, but I think the same applies to teachers and how they approach any given task or day or week of the timetable. Implementing any change, included blended learning, really needs to be collaborative for it to work. Would be happy to answer any questions that you have. So if you do have questions, please type them in and Sophie will convey them to us at the end of the presentation. So we'll make sure to leave enough time to get to specific questions. We also have our contact details at the end of the slides. So if you do have any follow-up questions that we can't answer here today, we're happy to help in the future. Just send us an email. Okay, so today we're going to have a look at a basic definition of blended learning, but also look at what it means in a practical sense to implement blended learning in English language programs. We'll also touch on what kind of blended learning we aren't dealing with, where students are left to their own devices, and pardon the pun, it's the only one that I'll make. We look at the rationale for blended learning and why we're advocates for a well-planned blended learning approach to any program. We'll then give some basic principles that should be seen as the foundations of any good blended learning program and a few ideas to get started. Next, Kimberly will show you a practical example from our own experience implementing a blended learning approach to our direct entry course, which is a university pathway program. This will hopefully exemplify some of the concepts we've looked at. We also spent a considerable amount of time and energy on getting staff and students on board, and employed theory from organizational learning literature, as well as research on students' learning and motivation. I'd say that this was as much, if not more so, a part of our role as blended learning designers, and that getting your staff and student buy-in is absolutely crucial. So Kimberly will talk through the various methods we use to support our staff and students at the beginning of the blended learning approach. We've condensed our takeaways into 5 points, which should hopefully help you in implementing any sort of change in your organization. Finally, we're going to share some resources that we found useful and that could help you in your own blended learning design. And again, we're happy to help if you want to send us an email afterwards. So moving on to a definition. There's quite a lot out there, but of all the definitions, we particularly like this one, and I'll give you a moment to read this. I think we like this because it highlights the modes that are being combined, the technology and face-to-face. For us, it's really important to note that the two should always be considered in relation to the other. It also points out that the blending of the two modes should be strategic and systematic. Blended learning is not about using technology for technology's sake. It's not about integrating as many new apps into your program as you can in the attempt to be tech-savvy teachers and course designers. In fact, I would strongly urge the opposite. I'd suggest not using technology, at least if you cannot articulate why it will make a noticeable improvement on the existing mode. We both really enjoy teaching and learning with technology and are excited about the possibilities for innovation, but we're not proposing you design a blended learning course without thinking first about the why, and we'll touch on this more later. Another way to think about blended learning is with a Venn diagram. This image from Deacon Prime is looking more at a VET context rather than an ESL context, but the principles are the same. It also represents how I see blended learning. I think the Venn diagram nicely represents how the face-to-face time and the digital learning interact and show how different activities can play out in the three contexts. One of the things I feel most strongly about when talking about blended learning is the word blended, the fact that they're mixed. And there should always be the intersection of face-to-face time with whatever students are doing outside of the class space. So Kimberly will show you our practical example, but as a broad rule, whatever's done outside of class should always dip into the class in some way. In the same way that it is basic practice to check homework that's given in class, there needs to be the same checking in class time for whatever tasks students are engaging with in the digital realm and in their own time. And also just a quick word on what we're not talking about today. Students being told to do self-study activities in class could be considered blended learning, but it's not the kind of approach that we will be talking about. If we're thinking about efficiency, this is just not utilizing that precious teacher-student time, and it's denying the opportunity for communicative activities. Whatever computer or mobile self-study exercise that has been given in this class could have been just as easily done for homework. Now, please don't think this is an attack on computer labs or computer lab lessons, because it's not. I've personally designed and taught computer lab lessons and had great success with them. It just simply goes back to the definition I highlighted at the start of the presentation about technology being presented in a strategic and systematic way. I've worked overseas where students paid to sit in a computer lab and work completely independently for hours at a time, being monitored by a teacher. There was no interaction except for dealing with technical issues. That's not the kind of approach that we want to take to blended learning design. We want to use technology to enhance class time and communicative activities, not take away from them. So to sum up, blended learning has to be intentional and it has to be meaningful. So by which the class time needs to be the best use of the class time, while the use of technology needs to be for the best possible reasons as well. So with that cautionary note out of the way, there are plenty of reasons to consider using blended learning for English language teaching. All of these points come from our own experience in both teaching and managing classes. So in our context, we found that our DET course was always time poor, and blended learning really did provide space for more genuine teaching in the classroom. We were also really pleased to see students who were reportedly quite passive in the classroom, when given the opportunity to engage in online forums, really come into their own, providing thoughtful pieces of work. Not only that, but giving them the space to reflect and formulate thoughts meant that in class, they were more able to engage with their peers. So it really does cater to different learning styles, which is great when there is that common divide between confident and shy speakers in the class. This also demonstrated to the confident speakers in the class that their quiet classmates still had a lot to offer. This leads to the third point, which is that technology allows us to innovate and create some real collaboration between students, which strengthen their teamwork skills. We were also thinking about the wider context our students are entering, both university and the 21st century workplace, and the skills that they need. Being able to learn new technologies, to adapt and to focus on challenge-based tasks are all skills that will be essential to our students and even to teachers. And a well-planned blended learning approach can be a soft introduction into the use of digital skills and development of a different set of competencies. And finally, we found that it could make our life easier and processes more efficient in the programs. So to sum up, we honestly believe that technology can be a wonderful aid, and good course design can be enhanced with the use of technology. So let's have a look now at designing a blended learning course. And please keep in mind that when I say designing, I think this is just as relevant for teachers, because the approach the teacher takes to technology in the classroom is fundamental to the student's experience. And that's not just lip service, that's a real, genuine point that needs to be stressed. So the following points are relevant to everyone involved in teaching and learning. So the first step in course design, and blended learning is no different, should be to start at the very end. And by which I mean, what are the learning objectives? This should inform all subsequent design decisions. What do you want to achieve, or what do you want the students to accomplish by the end of the task? Once you know your outcomes, you work backwards. So you need to determine how you'll assess them. In our context, the blended learning tasks are still mostly assessed in traditional manner, but this is focusing on the summative assessment, the assessment at the very end of the task. So that said, you can also think about the continuous ongoing assessment, which is also crucial for a number of reasons. Ongoing assessment of progress helps give students timely feedback, make sure they're on task. It helps teachers perform accurate needs analyses and be responsive to their students' needs. And finally, for a new task, or new course, or a new initiative, such as implementing technology, it's vital to keep students engaged and on track. So once these two factors have been thought over, then you can start to think about the design of the task and how you will use technology, class time, and out of class time effectively. It's also important to keep in mind the situational factors. So for example, a general English student will have a very different profile to a university pathway student. Think about their technological and internet access, their time, what their motivations are, their study load, potential workload, and a host of other factors. It's also really important to think about the curricular context, what's happening around them. It can be really easy to get caught up in the new technology, the new affordances, the new activities, but you have to think, are you going to overload the students, and are you going to overload the teachers? So those are all really important considerations right from the beginning, before the task design has really even begun. Now, one useful model when thinking about implementing technology in the classroom is the SAMR model, which you can see a representation of on screen. This is a hierarchical model, and it's worth mentioning that too often the use of technology doesn't really leave the first tier, that of substitution, where technology is replacing a traditional method but with no real benefit. This is often a case of just wanting to use the technology because it's new, because it looks good. So a really important question to ask is, does this technology make the existing activity better? Or even, could I do this just as well without the technology? If you think a traditional method is just as good or better, then again, I'd strongly advise you not to use technology, however tempting it is. And this is because students and teachers must be convinced that there is a genuine benefit to technology in general in the teaching and learning experience. So if there are some tasks where the use of technology is unnecessary, then you run the serious risk of losing the students' and teachers' support and interest, especially when the traditional method is simpler. Which means when they get to a part of the program where a task is using technology in an innovative way, which does improve the learning experience, students and teachers just won't bother with it. So if you're bringing in technology in tasks for the first time, think very carefully about them. Have a really strong rationale for the task and make a good first impression. The other three levels are different contexts where technology is a useful addition. And it's worth saying that while redefinition seems like the goal, the highest peak of technological integration, it's good to keep in mind that different activities call for different implementations. Sometimes an enhancement, a simple augmentation is all that's needed rather than a radical transformation of a traditional task that works well. For those who are visual learners, this picture is a nice representation of the SAMR model in practice. Although I would argue a boat is not mere substitution for swimming, but that's nitpicking. I think it represents it pretty well in general. Okay, so moving on. Finally, I'd like to share this image. A few years ago, this infographic was a very popular representation of how the SAMR model could be applied to mobile learning. And I think it's really good to spark ideas within the staff room, as there's so much potential. It's also good to think about using what students and teachers are already familiar with. So the zone of proximal development isn't too great. You don't want to throw too many new things at people all at once. I think using what's in their pockets, their phones, and the apps they know is a great transition point with a blended learning design. However, there has been some debate over the poster, especially if you're quite literal in your interpretation, and therefore you think that Google search can only be used for augmentation while Google Chrome can only be used for modification. Of course, that's a bit narrow-minded and missing the point. I do think that the poster is great for inspiration to spark ideas about how teachers can be using technology in tasks. Of course, the poster doesn't touch on course design, which we would argue is most important. As I mentioned, starting with your outcomes and working backwards is the best starting point. So now I'll hand over to my colleague Kimberly, who will give you a practical example of how we approached blended learning from our direct entry course. And I'll be back at the end to help answer any questions that you may have. All right, thank you. Kimberly?
Thanks, Ben. Okay, just make sure I can. Okay, so I'm going to show you how we applied these theories and concepts in blended learning design to a course that Ben and I worked on together last year at the Centre for English Teaching. So as with any course, we begin by assessing student needs and identifying what's missing in the current course and where a blended learning approach might actually help. So we start with student needs. And let's look at a case study to see how this works in practice. We'll explore how we implemented two sets of tasks that made use of the learning management system that we have at the Centre for English Teaching. We use Blackboard for the direct entry course. So the direct entry course, affectionately called DEC, is a university pathways course which involves intensive training in academic English and academic skills. It's always been delivered as a face-to-face course with students studying 20 hours a week. And the full course is 36 weeks long, or about 6 months long. So DEC is our case study for this session. Now let me give you a bit of an idea about the students in the program and their needs. in DEC, about over 90% of students come from mainland China, and we have some students from the Middle East, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Once these students have passed the requirements of our course, they enter the first year of undergraduate or postgraduate study at Sydney University, and from here they go into a range of disciplines. Last year, Ben and I had some meetings with tutors, lecturers, and course coordinators from the business faculty, which receives about 2/3 of our graduates. It was through these discussions that we learnt that there were indeed some gaps in the academic skills and competencies that students need in their very first year of university. Two main gaps emerged, and we decided to tackle these front and centre. The first was the challenge of participating fully in tutorial discussions. And secondly, students needed help with digital literacy and specifically the kinds of skills that are required in an academic context. Things like navigating the learning management system, posting threads in the right place, and behaving appropriately online. So now we know what the needs are, we set about designing tasks that would address them. And to do this, we made use of Blackboard, the university LMS that is used at Sydney University. Okay, so to address this first gap, we made use of the group discussion board tool in Blackboard and designed some new scaffolded tasks that led to a weekly formatively assessed tutorial discussion in class. What I'll show you next are screenshots of 3 discussion board tasks in Blackboard that precede the weekly in-class tutorial. Students online are discussing the effects of the tourism industry, and I'll summarise them for you so you don't really have to worry about reading the text on screen. Okay. So here we have a shot from, sorry, I'll just go back, a Monday discussion board task. What's being discussed here is the topic of tourism and its impact on local communities. So on Monday, students were asked to find a picture of a positive effect and a negative effect of tourism, drawing upon their own experiences, and they had to post these pictures to the discussion board with a description and a comment on, then to comment on somebody else's post. So they post their own comment, their own pictures, and then they have to engage with a peer's post and link their ideas to somebody else's. So here's step 1 in the task is asking students to draw upon their own experience and to comment on somebody else's post. On Tuesday, the task asked students to examine a reading on the effects of tourism on culture. And the task here was for students to research another example of tourism, either protecting or harming a local culture, and to describe this in a post of about 150 words. So step 2 here on Tuesday, online, students are engaging with and extending the ideas in a prescribed academic text. On Thursday, students were given the tutorial discussion question and they were asked to respond to it, drawing upon the week's reading and the lecture to structure their response. So here students were asked to reference these sources appropriately if they use them, and to comment on other people's posts with their own opinion. So by this stage of the week, students were doing 2 things. They were justifying their ideas with reference to core texts, and they were beginning to question the responses of others. And the online space made this a little bit more comfortable for our students to do initially. Tutorial discussions then ran in class as per usual on Fridays. So this is a repeated activity in our DEC course. So by Fridays, students had had the time to prepare throughout the week. They had read the material. They could personalise the discussion with examples from their own experience. They could refer to the readings to justify their response. And they were already commenting on the input from other classmates. This is exactly what you want students to be able to do in a live tutorial. So these skills were honed over the week through online group discussion board tasks that made the in-class tutorial much less daunting for our students. And teachers noted the difference in their ability to express ideas and engage with the content critically. So we wanted to help our students build confidence in participating in a live tutorial discussion, and blended tasks making use of the discussion board tool in Blackboard worked really well for this. Students were able to prepare for what they wanted to say at home and then engage with their peers online in a less daunting space. And what we found was that this resulted in better quality tutorial discussions every Friday in class. And we're not the only people who know about this. There's now a bit of research that's emerging on the experience of Chinese students who come to Australia to do university study, and often online spaces such as discussion groups allow for knowledge to be built and shared in a much less confronting space. Okay, so let's return to the second gap we wanted to discuss, and that was of digital literacy. Sorry, I've gone too far. So the second gap or need that we addressed was helping students to navigate the LMS, to post threads, and to behave appropriately online. For this, we decided to create a series of screencasts, which are short videos with a talking head in the corner, and quizzes that taught students how to use digital tools that were not only part of the DEC course, but also part of their university experience. Unfortunately, we can't play videos here in the webinar, but I've taken a series of screenshots to exemplify one of the video lessons. So this one was the first in the series, and it takes students through the use of discussion boards in academic contexts. It's about 4 minutes long, and this is enough time to familiarise students with the tool, to explain how it works and what the expectations are, and to put forward some guidelines on how to make the most of the tool for learning purposes. We made a series of these videos and made them available via the learning management system. And we also provided a transcript and a quiz which checks understanding. So that was the implementation, I guess, of this content. There was a video, a transcript, and then a follow-up quiz. So it's in our course timetables now for students to watch these videos and complete the quiz outside of class time on Friday afternoon and over the weekend. And the teachers answer any follow-up questions in class on the following Monday. So essentially we've flipped this content and taken it outside of the classroom, with teachers really just addressing concerns that may have arisen while students did this in their own time. Okay. So Ben and I wanted to include in this webinar some tips for getting your staff and students on board with blended learning. And these are based on our own experiences as well as theories in organisational management. Firstly, we know that the key to uptake is making sure that teachers are using the tool and encouraging their students to engage with the tool. Teachers have incredible influence over their students, and it's crucial to the success of new online tasks, or any tasks really, that teachers are on board from the beginning. So teacher buy-in is essential. You ignore this at your own peril. We need teachers to be advocates of out-of-class learning, including engagement with the learning management system. The best way to do this is to make sure that you hear their concerns and their ideas, and you create comfortable spaces for training and upskilling. We used both top-down and bottom-up approaches to facilitate this. Teachers also need to feel part of the decision-making process. Okay, so let me give you some ideas based on what we did. Firstly, we acknowledged that people like to give feedback in different ways, so we adopted a few different modes to collect feedback from teachers. On the right, you can see the results of a survey that went out to teachers about the learning management system and the new tasks. And on the left are some photocopied strips of paper that we used at the beginning of a teachers meeting, where we asked teachers if they had any burning questions about the LMS or the tasks that we had designed, and we collected them at the beginning of the meeting and were able to address some of them in the meeting and some of them afterwards in follow-up. The questions were revealing in terms of areas where we needed to provide more training. It also showed us concerns, and it also it also emerged that teachers were also sharing their ideas too in this space. So to answer any concerns and to provide targeted help to teachers, our third blended learning designer, Aaron Jolly, who you can see in on screen here, the little talking head, he created a series of screencasts to help teachers navigate the LMS and to learn the basics. Another way of gathering feedback, although it might be time-consuming, is to conduct some one-on-one interviews or feedback sessions with teachers. So we started off by targeting teachers who seem to be implementing blended learning tasks quite well and taking it in their stride, really, as in they didn't seem to need any extra support. And we bought them a coffee or a tea and sat down for about 15 minutes with each of these teachers and took notes on what they had experienced. So yes, this was time consuming, but it was so worthwhile because we heard all about these strategies and practices and creative uses of the tasks that we otherwise wouldn't have heard about. We wanted to showcase the work of teachers who were making innovative use of the LMS, so we organised a lightning talks session as soon as we could. Lightning talks are a way, Lightning talks are a format for professional development that has been used at our centre to share research methods and findings. The format involves each speaker presenting for 5 minutes, and this is followed up by a 5-minute question and answer session. Lightning talks facilitate peer learning, and it's a really good bottom-up approach to training. More recently, we've started to document best practice in designing digital content, because now we have different teams at CET creating their own screencasts to help students in different aspects. So this includes our counsellors at CET who have created a series of workshops to help students in areas such as understanding procrastination, good study strategies, dealing with homesickness, and we have support class coordinators also creating videos to help students in remedial classes. So this set of guidelines emerged as a collaborative effort among teams, is constantly being added to, and it sets out some basic principles for creating digital content and tips, and it's a way for us to share best practice in this area. Okay, and finally, this cycle is never over. As with any course, we're constantly reviewing what has come before and planning for a second, third, fourth iteration of tasks that we've designed, whether they're blended tasks or not. So it's important to constantly review what you've done, to get feedback from as many different channels as you can, and to strive to improve it. So this takes us to the end of our webinar today. What I have next are some resources to help you get started with blending your own courses if you so desire. So these slides will be made available to you after the webinar. Okay, so we've got a link for some guidance on blended learning implementation in English language teaching, which has some nice examples. If you're interested in developing your own screencasts or training videos, this resource, Teacher Training Videos, will help you get started with using software like Camtasia, which is what we use at CET to develop those videos. If you're interested in, if you don't have one and you're interested in a free platform that will work as a learning management system, there are some ideas here that you can have a look at. So there's Schoology, Course Sites, and Google Classroom. They all work as virtual learning environments or learning management systems and alternatives to Blackboard. And we also have a link to the e-learning industry site, which will keep you up to date with EdTech and instructional design. Okay, and I've listed some references here. But we're really interested in hearing if you have, and contact details if you have any questions. But you can also ask us your questions now, and Sophie will be so kind as to moderate them.
Okay. First question has come up, which is, can we get a link to the recorded webinar as well? And the answer to that is yes. So the slides and the link to the webinar recording will be on the English Australia website. If you go to colleges, then you'll find the page that has the past webinars. You just need your college's login details to be able to access them. If you just ask your manager, they'll give them to you. Okay, so if you can type your questions into the chat box, then, or they could be comments as well, and Ben and Kimberly can talk to them.
So while we're waiting, I'd just like to emphasize what Kimberly said at the end there, that almost, everything that we've talked about today can be done with free software, with free applications, websites. And there's a wealth of material, resources on the theory, on the practical implementations out there. And the more you read, I think the more you'll see that a lot of the information overlaps, that there's some really clear principles in designing. So you're certainly not alone if you're implementing tasks, whether as a teacher or within a program itself.
Great. I've just put that slide up because somebody asked for your contact details again. All right, so somebody has asked how you manage the quality of the created materials.
Kimberly, would you like to start?
Well, I guess we're teachers and course designers, so we come to the design of any new task with that knowledge behind us. We work in collaboration with teachers, so we hear their ideas, and we evaluate tasks that have been designed to see whether they're working for students, whether they're working for teachers, and as I said before, it's a constant cycle of reviewing and redesigning things to make them more implementable, I guess, and yeah. So I don't know if that's it.
No,
yeah.
I think so. I'll just add to that by saying I think it goes back to just asking that question, why? A very basic question, but why are you doing this? What, and then what will it achieve? Going back to the outcome. So always keeping that at the forefront when you're thinking about. It is a big picture question, but it also is a little picture question. It's about every step of the task. Is that the right activity? Is that the right thing that we should be doing? So I think just having that questioning voice the whole step of the way is the best and cheapest way of ensuring quality. But that said, you need to. We've been lucky that we always work together, bounced ideas off each other, and also with our fellow teachers. And that said, not everything is going to be pure gold, and that's why listening, even once it's been implemented, is important, because courses are always cyclical. They come back, and you can always, you should be piloting things, but once they run, a whole host of ideas or challenges could come up that you just didn't, that you couldn't foresee. So always evaluating and making sure that you can change it for the next run, I think, is really, really important. And if you're communicating that to the teachers, I think they're really on board as well. So knowing, that's why it goes back to what I said at the very beginning, knowing it's collaborative. So something's designed, but it needs to be a living thing, and when teachers show you the practical reasons why there might be a shortcoming, we can react to that and make it better for the next time.
Okay.
I think it helps to have as many people as possible review your designs before it's implemented, to trial it, and to get that feedback early on as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Was it more challenging to design blended activities for the lower level students?
Well, with our deck course, we're dealing with a set level. It's not quite the same as the general English, so they're all coming in at the same level. Obviously, there's within a broad, within a classification, whether CEFR or IELTS, there's going to be a big difference between two B1 or two IELTS 6 students, but they were fairly consistent with our deck program. But looking at other programs, I would say no. I think language is one issue. Students are coming, again, we have adult learners, they are immersed in technology, and using what they know and using it in new ways to support learning. I don't think it needs to be too much of an issue whether they're strong or they're weak students, weak English speakers.
No, neither do I. I think you might just need to think about how you grade your language in your instructions to cater to lower levels. If you're designing a task that goes online, maybe provide examples for lower level students. We provide a transcript with any video that we make, so that students who aren't able to capture the message by listening to the video one time can review the transcript, and in that way we're making it accessible to students who are weaker in listening.
And it goes back to that SAMR model that I mentioned. And so with a lower level course, lower level students, you have a whole host of appropriate tasks for them. And so you're really thinking, how do you want technology to aid those existing tasks?
Okay. There's a question about the tutorial tasks that Kimberly showed. The question is, do you set up the tutorial tasks, or do teachers take control of these themselves? Do all classes do the same topic?
The answer is yes to both of those questions. So we set up, the tutorial tasks are set, and they're the same for every class, so that doesn't change, and the online tasks are the same. It's up to teachers to monitor the discussion themselves and to think about how they integrate the discussion board into their own class. So they might put the discussion board on the projector and go through different posts by students and ask for an extension of ideas, or that could be one way that a teacher could engage with the discussion board tasks. There are others, but essentially all teachers had the same online task, discussion board task, and the same tutorial question that was given on the Friday.
And that's because for our direct entry course, we really wanted to have consistency across the classes, because there's quite a lot at our peak. We also wanted the blended learning design not to be this added extra thing, but a core part of the curriculum, which is why why it's the same for every class. It's just like the textbook is the same for every class. It's just a different mode of delivery. But that said, that's the decision we made for that context, and it could work just as well or better for a different context if you gave each teacher in each class the freedom to run with their own topics, their own forums. I think it would be great for certain other contexts, because then the teacher could be directly responding to what that class is interested in. Yeah.
Okay. And I just have a question on that. Did the teachers have any professional development around interacting with these blended tasks in class? Because I imagine that would have been new for quite a lot of people.
You mean moderating the forums, Sophie?
Yeah, I mean, sort of bringing the task into class and, commenting on it with the students or interacting with the task
Yeah.
in class.
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the things we did was create a PowerPoint and a suggested procedure for preparing the students for the upcoming tutorial. And part of that involved bringing the discussion that had taken place across the week into the classroom again. So that was scaffolded for teachers and developed by us to supplement the course materials.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things we did.
Yeah. Yes, just to, at the start of the course, when those tasks were being introduced for the first time, there was a training session where we had a graphic of the schedule and a graphic of the discussion board task, and we would look at which one pops up when, suggest how to deal with it in class, made sure that there was scheduled class time for the interaction, and there was really healthy discussion. Again, this is something why it's so important to just keep checking in, because we had a clear idea of what we thought the outcomes were for that, but in terms of developing their critical thinking, preparing their ideas for communication in class and tutorial discussions. However, some teachers kind of took to it looking at error correction. So then the idea of fluency rather than accuracy came up, and it's a healthy conversation to be having, and it's always going to be ongoing as new teachers come in and as the course comes again.
Okay. Thank you. Someone's asked if you've had any feedback from the business faculty on the participation of DEC students in tutorials since they've completed their course.
It's too early actually to have that data because this was implemented last year, so we could ask fairly soon for students who graduated from our University Pathways College and are now at the business faculty. But we had a few follow-up meetings with faculty members to show them the new tasks and what we had designed after hearing their concerns and their comments, and they really liked the shape of it, and they thought that it was going to be very useful to have these extra bits in our course to address those needs. But yes, it would be really good to get that data soon to hear how students are going in their first year at the business faculty now.
Definitely, for the outcomes, yeah, that would be interesting. Another person has asked how you found participation to be throughout the course, and they want to know if participation varies around assessment periods.
Yeah, definitely. I think the closer students get to the pointy end of the stick, the more they kind of knuckle down on what they need to do to pass. So it's an ongoing challenge, and it's something to think about with how we consistently get students to engage. And there needs to be constructive alignment, of course, with the task and the assessment.
Okay.
That said, sorry, no, that's really not fully answering it. So I think, yeah, definitely there was varying levels of participation, and students around the assessment, they could drop off, but it also was interesting to see that different classes had very different results. So some classes still showed really strong engagement consistently throughout. And I'm really curious whether that's because it's being really teacher-driven, or whether it's a really motivated group of students. So yeah, there's different levels of engagement from class to class. Yeah.
All right. Someone said that they love the way you collect feedback from staff, and they want to know if you ask students how they feel about the blended learning course.
Yeah, there's course evaluations for all students at the end of each section. So Kimberly showed that graphic where our deck course is split into different either 5 or 10 week blocks. So there's always course evaluations at the end of each one of those blocks. So there's definitely feedback from students, and we do ask them about the use of technology. So we do get feedback from the students as well. Yeah.
All right. Another question, is student participation part of their assessment?
Online it isn't, but it leads up to the tutorial, which is assessed at the end of the course. So there's an assessment in the penultimate week of the course that's quite a big speaking assessment. It's a live tutorial. So teachers who made that link explicit to the students and provided a strong rationale for why it's important to have these lively debates every week to hone skills in critical thinking and engaging with the text and discussing ideas and concepts with others. Making that link really clear is so important to get students on board with tasks that are formatively assessed and that lead up to a final assessment. But no, they didn't. Oh, I was just going to say, no, they weren't given a score for online participation.
It's definitely an avenue that could be followed. I mean, there's nothing stopping you assessing that. However, I really like to think of the technology, and it's a personal philosophy, but we don't assess the use of a textbook in class, and I'd like to think that we could integrate the technology in the same way, where it just becomes a part of the classroom experience. So with that particular task that Kimberly showed, it's not assessed. However, it's necessary to complete to be able to do the end of week tutorial discussion. Just like using a book isn't assessed, but you're there in class, you need to engage with it. And there are obviously more challenges with the technology because it's being done outside of class, but that's why we really made sure that there was scheduled check-in time for every discussion board in class, so that the teacher could kind of bring students to account, to really encourage those who were participating, and to encourage those who weren't to get on board, just to show that their work was being followed. So I'd really like to see. I know assessment is really, really important, but I'd like to see technology just not necessarily as the end result, but actually just really integrated within the course in the same way that traditional materials are, because we don't think about assessing the traditional materials.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. There's a question from someone. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer it. It's quite technical, but the question is about how you have divided the percent of time between the face-to-face and the online portion of the courses.
Oh, that's interesting. We actually have a model of 4:1, this ratio that we talk about at CET. That's not exact, but it's a guideline now. So what that means is every day of the course, the students are expected to be in class participating in a face-to-face traditional format for 4 hours a day. And then each day engaging with the learning management system and for 2 hours. So that's completing tasks such as the discussion board tasks or anything else that their teacher may put up online. And then the final number 1 is 1 hour every day of engaging in some other means in English to improve your English. So that could be attending an activity that's put on by the centre, such as a discussion group, or we have student engagement council sessions. So attendance at one of these things per day, or taking the initiative to do anything really, an hour of extra English practice, which makes up 7 hours in a day. So that's really a full-time study load.
Yeah.
But it's not exact. So 2 hours a day is not really exact, but it's a good guideline.
Yeah, good rule of thumb. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we might just have the last question now because we're nearing the finish time. Someone has asked if teachers use the platform for feedback on writing or speaking.
Yeah, so this was I think I mentioned this in passing earlier, but it was raised quite a bit, and teachers were a little bit concerned sometimes at the idea of suddenly this increased marking load, because if you had say 18 students putting up 250-word passages a week, this load on top of their marking load already would be quite a lot. So from our point of view, I think just like in the spoken context, you can be focusing on fluency or accuracy, and we don't really do both in the same activity. So sometimes we're really just trying to encourage students to be fluent, to speak, to make that sort of connection. It's the same thing with our discussion board task. So we really wanted to get them to engage in the critical thinking, to prepare for their detailed responses in the communicative activity, the tutorial discussions in class, and focusing on error correction, I think, kind of divides the task a little bit too much. There's already plenty of time in the classroom where that's done, and that wasn't really the point of this task. And I think it was really important to make that explicit to the teachers and to the students.
Yeah, I agree. Kimberly, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, the part of the question was about speaking tasks, I think, as well. So do we use the learning management system for speaking? The end result of the online discussion is a live tutorial discussion where students have got the ideas that are more fully developed as a result of the practice and are better able to speak, is the idea. We did, there are a lot of things that you can do with the LMS to practice speaking. We did experiment with one task which didn't work very well because of the timing of it just before a big assessment, where we asked students to record themselves for a minute giving their initial response, initial position to the tutorial prompt, and then to post that online. And the idea was for students to give peer feedback on pronunciation, and for the teacher to also give feedback on pronunciation. It didn't work that well because perhaps because it was really close to another assessment task. So there are things that you can do if you experiment with. There are plenty of things you can do to help students with pronunciation. That's just one idea, but my advice would be to time it, time it well.
Absolutely. And there were also issues with that task as well with students feeling a bit shy making video, and then teachers not wanting to push them out of their comfort zone. And so that's another discussion I think that can be had in the centre where, for example, they will be pushed out of their comfort zone when they're doing presentations at university. So, but I think there has to be a real clear vision and then strong communication of what the task is for. But there's definitely so many possibilities for the use. I just think it has to be really well planned out. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we might stop there. I just want to thank everyone in the audience for coming and also for your great questions. I think the question time brought up a lot of interesting issues, so thank you for that. And thanks to Kimberly and Ben for the session. I certainly got a lot out of it, and I'm sure everyone else in the audience did as well. So a big thank you to you two as well for sharing your expertise.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. And if you have any other questions, feel free to send either of us an email and we'll respond to them.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much. There's lots of thank yous coming through on the chat bar as well. Good stuff.
Good. Thank you, guys. Thank you for everyone who actually participated. Thank you for having an audience. It's very nice.